In early March 2019, a small town outside of Manchester, England, became the center of attention after a tragic case shocked the community. What began as a private matter between two newlyweds soon developed into a criminal case that would be discussed across the country. The story involves a 29-year-old woman named Claire Thompson. Claire had grown up in northern England and worked in the retail sector. Friends and colleagues described her as quiet, polite, and someone who generally avoided conflict. She had recently married 32-year-old Michael Harris, a construction worker who lived in the same area. The couple had been together for just over a year before deciding to get married. Their wedding took place in February 2019 in a modest ceremony attended by a small group of family members and close friends. To many who knew them, the couple appeared happy and ready to begin a stable life together. They rented a small house not far from the city center, where they planned to start their new chapter as husband and wife. However, beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. Claire carried a personal history that she had not fully shared with her husband. She was a transgender woman who had transitioned years earlier. While many in her circle knew this, Michael had not been fully aware. This private aspect of her life would later play a central role in the events that unfolded in the weeks after their wedding. The case began quietly, but within days, it would grow into a matter involving the police, the court, and the wider public. Claire Thompson was born in 1990 in a small town in northern England. She grew up in a working-class family, the youngest of 3 children. Her parents, both factory workers, tried to provide stability at home even though money was often limited. From a young age, Claire knew she felt different. During her teenage years, she struggled with her identity, but by her early 20s, she had started her transition. This process was not easy. It involved not only medical steps but also emotional and social challenges. Despite the difficulties, she remained determined to live authentically. By the time she reached her late 20s, Claire had built a life that looked ordinary on the surface. She worked in retail at a local clothing store, where she was known as polite, reliable, and always willing to help customers. Those who knew her personally described her as kind and reserved, someone who preferred quiet evenings at home rather than social events. Although she did not openly discuss her transition with everyone she met, many in her close circle knew and accepted her. Michael Harris, born in 1987, grew up in the same region. His childhood was shaped by a strict father and a mother who worked part-time jobs to support the family. After finishing school, Michael chose to work in construction, following in the footsteps of several relatives. He was known for being hardworking and straightforward, though sometimes quick-tempered. Friends described him as a man who enjoyed going to the local pub, watching football, and keeping a small group of close friends. Michael met Claire in early 2018 at a cafe in Manchester. Their meeting was unplanned. Michael had stopped by the cafe after work, and Claire was there with a colleague. A casual conversation started, leading to an exchange of numbers. Over the next few months, they grew closer. Michael admired Claire's calm personality, while Claire found Michael's confidence and stability attractive. Their relationship developed quickly. Within a year, Michael proposed and Claire accepted. Those around them saw the couple as serious about building a future together. The engagement period was short. They planned a modest wedding in February 2019, held at a registry office with a small reception afterward. For Claire, the day was filled with both happiness and anxiety. While she was excited to begin a new life with Michael, she also carried the weight of a truth she had not fully shared with him. Michael, for his part, appeared proud and content. He spoke to friends about wanting to start a family and settle down. At the wedding, his family members congratulated him warmly. Claire's side of the family attended as well, offering support. To most who were present, it looked like the start of an ordinary marriage. After the wedding, the couple moved into a rented terraced house not far from Manchester city centre. The house was small but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a modest living room, and a small garden at the back. Both Claire and Michael returned to their jobs shortly after the wedding, settling into a routine. Claire worked daytime shifts at the clothing store, while Michael's construction job often required him to leave early in the morning and return late in the afternoon. In the beginning, their life together seemed uneventful. They shared meals, watched television, and occasionally went out with friends. Neighbors described them as polite, though not particularly outgoing. Michael sometimes chatted with other residents about football, while Claire mostly kept to herself. Despite the appearance of stability, there were unspoken tensions. Claire still carried the secret of her transgender identity. She had chosen not to disclose it to Michael before marriage, fearing rejection or conflict. Although she believed in her right to privacy, she also understood the risk of her husband discovering the truth unexpectedly. This unspoken matter lingered in the background of their marriage. Michael, on the other hand, believed he knew everything important about his wife. He saw her as reserved but trustworthy. For him, their future seemed clear: building a home, possibly having children, and maintaining a steady life together. As February turned into March, the couple continued with their daily routines. Friends noticed nothing unusual. Claire occasionally spoke with her sister, who knew her history and worried about the fact that Michael had not been told. Claire reassured her, saying that she wanted to wait for the right moment. That moment, however, never came before events took a different turn. At this stage, the marriage was less than a month old. On the surface, everything seemed calm, but the situation carried the potential for conflict. Claire's decision to withhold part of her past created a fragile foundation beneath what looked like a stable relationship. The house they lived in would soon become the setting for the events that followed. For now, it was simply a newlywed home, filled with ordinary signs of two people starting life together: wedding photographs, unpacked boxes, and shared routines. But within weeks, that home would no longer be remembered as a place of new beginnings, but as the center of a criminal investigation that would shock both families and attract the attention of the wider community. The early weeks of Claire and Michael's marriage passed quietly. On the surface, nothing appeared unusual. They both continued their jobs and returned home in the evenings, following the routines common to many young couples. Michael was often tired after long hours at construction sites, while Claire usually came home after managing customers at the clothing store. They spent most nights together, preparing dinner, watching television, or making plans for the weekend. For Claire, however, every day carried a private sense of unease. She was still keeping a part of her life hidden from her husband. Her identity as a transgender woman was something she had not openly shared with Michael. Although many people in her family and among her friends were aware, she had chosen not to disclose it during their relationship and engagement. Claire had always intended to tell him one day, but the right moment never seemed to arrive. After the wedding, she felt the pressure of the secret increasing. The situation changed one evening in March 2019, less than a month after their wedding. Michael was at home earlier than usual, having finished work before sunset. Claire was in the shower, and her phone, left on the living room table, lit up with a new message. Michael, curious, picked it up. The message came from one of Claire's old friends. It was casual in tone but included a reference to Claire's past, written in a way that made Michael pause. The message mentioned something about the strength it took during your transition years ago. Michael read the message several times. At first he was confused. The wording did not make immediate sense to him. Then, as he thought more about it, he realized what the friend was referring to. By the time Claire came out of the shower, Michael was sitting on the couch, holding her phone, waiting for her. The first confrontation was tense but calm. Michael asked directly, "What does this mean?" showing her the message. Claire froze. For years she had feared this exact moment. She tried to respond carefully, explaining that it referred to her past, something she had not shared with him yet. Michael pressed further, demanding clarity. Finally, Claire admitted that she was a transgender woman and had transitioned years earlier, long before they had met. The admission created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Michael's reaction was a mix of shock, confusion, and anger. He stood up, pacing across the room, asking why she had not told him before their marriage. Claire tried to explain that she had been afraid of losing him, that she loved him and wanted a chance at a normal life together. She emphasized that she was still the same person he had fallen in love with. Michael struggled to process the information. His questions became more pointed. Did my family know? Did your family know? Was everyone keeping this from me? His voice grew louder as his frustration increased. Claire attempted to calm him, but the more she spoke, the more Michael felt betrayed. That evening ended without violence, but the tension was undeniable. Michael left the house for several hours, returning late at night. The next few days were filled with silence between them. Michael went to work without saying much, and Claire tried to keep the household running as usual. She reached out to her sister, telling her what had happened. Her sister advised her to be patient, giving Michael time to process the truth. Claire hoped the situation would settle with time, but it did not. The conflict grew when Michael began questioning everything about their relationship. He accused Claire of hiding essential facts, of deceiving him during their courtship. At meals, his comments became sharp. At night, he often slept in a separate room. Neighbors noticed that the couple no longer appeared together outside as they once had. One weekend, the argument resurfaced more intensely. Michael confronted Claire again, demanding answers about why she had concealed her history. He expressed anger at what he saw as dishonesty, saying that marriage should be built on complete truth. Claire responded that her identity did not change who she was, and that she had feared his reaction. She insisted that she had married him out of love, not deceit. The more Claire explained, the more Michael felt cornered. His emotions shifted from confusion to resentment. What had started as a moment of discovery soon developed into an ongoing argument that shaped their daily lives. By mid-March, the situation had escalated to the point where close relatives began to notice. Michael's mother mentioned to a friend that her son was troubled but did not give details. Claire's sister grew increasingly worried after hearing the tone of their conversations over the phone. The initial discovery, Michael reading a single message on Claire's phone, was small in itself, but its consequences were significant. It was the spark that brought hidden truths into the open and set off a chain of conflict that neither of them could easily stop. At this stage, the issue had not yet turned violent, but the foundation of their marriage had cracked. The arguments, the silence, and the sense of betrayal laid the groundwork for what would soon become a far more serious and irreversible event. The trigger had been pulled, and the days ahead would carry consequences that neither Claire nor Michael could have fully anticipated when they stood together at the altar just weeks earlier. After the night when Michael first learned the truth about Claire's past, the atmosphere inside their home changed completely. What had once been a place of quiet routines and small signs of a new marriage now became filled with silence, suspicion, and frequent arguments. Michael's initial reaction of shock did not fade quickly. He struggled to understand what he had discovered and often replayed their relationship in his mind, questioning every detail. He wondered whether Claire's family had kept the information from him intentionally and whether friends who had congratulated them at the wedding had known all along. The sense of betrayal grew larger in his mind with each passing day. Claire, on the other hand, tried to hold the relationship together. She prepared meals, asked about his work, and attempted to speak calmly whenever conversations turned tense. She explained more about her past, describing the difficulties she had faced and how much effort it had taken to live openly as herself. She told him that her decision to wait before telling him came from fear of rejection, not from a desire to mislead. But her explanations often made little impact on Michael. Neighbors began to notice changes in the couple's behavior. Before, Michael and Claire would sometimes walk to the local shop together or share small conversations with people nearby. Now, Michael was often seen leaving the house alone, sometimes late at night. Claire, in contrast, appeared withdrawn, rarely speaking with anyone outside. Inside the home, arguments became more frequent. Michael accused Claire of dishonesty, repeating that marriage should be built on complete trust. Claire defended herself, saying that she had always been honest in her feelings toward him, even if she had delayed sharing part of her history. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Michael demanding answers, Claire attempting to calm him, and both ending the night without resolution. By the second week after the discovery, the tension had begun to affect Michael's daily life. At work, colleagues noticed that he was distracted. He sometimes left early or showed frustration on the construction site. Friends who met him at the pub found him more irritable, though he did not openly share the details of his personal life. One close friend later said that Michael seemed preoccupied with something serious, but refused to explain. Claire confided in her sister again, explaining that the arguments were becoming harder to manage. Her sister encouraged her to consider counseling, either individually or as a couple. Claire agreed that professional help might be useful, but she did not know how to raise the idea with Michael, who was already angry and resistant. The situation worsened when Michael began questioning Claire about her past in more detail. He asked about her medical history, about when she had transitioned, and about who else in their community might know. His tone during these conversations was often sharp, filled with suspicion. Claire answered as best as she could, but the questions themselves carried a sense of interrogation that made her feel isolated in her own home. One evening in mid-March, the argument escalated further. Michael accused Claire of marrying him under false pretenses, suggesting that she had trapped him in a marriage without being truthful. Claire responded firmly, saying that she had married him out of love, not deceit, and that she remained the same person he had chosen. The exchange ended with Michael leaving the house abruptly, slamming the door as he went. That night, Claire called her sister in tears, saying that she did not know how much longer she could manage the situation. Her sister urged her to consider staying elsewhere temporarily, at least until Michael calmed down. Claire, however, insisted that she wanted to try to repair the relationship and believed that Michael might eventually understand. The following days showed no improvement. Michael returned home, but the distance between them grew. He often avoided speaking to Claire except for short, practical exchanges. Meals were eaten in silence. At night, he sometimes stayed in the second bedroom. The tension also began to show in small physical signs. Michael slammed doors, raised his voice more frequently, and occasionally threw objects onto the table in frustration. While these moments did not yet involve direct harm, they indicated that his anger was becoming more difficult to control. Claire noticed these changes and felt increasingly unsafe, though she hoped the situation would not escalate further. By late March, their marriage had reached a fragile state. Less than 2 months after their wedding, the couple was living under the same roof but barely speaking in any meaningful way. Both families sensed that something was wrong, though neither side knew the full details. Claire's sister continued to express concern, while Michael's mother mentioned that her son seemed distant and unsettled. The pressure inside the home grew heavier with each passing day. The lack of resolution, combined with Michael's growing resentment and Claire's attempts to maintain peace, created an environment where conflict was constant. What had begun with a single message on a phone had now expanded into a daily struggle that touched every part of their lives: work, family, and home. The rising tension was not visible to outsiders in its full form, but those who were close could sense that the marriage was not stable. Friends who had once congratulated the couple on their wedding now noticed their absence from social gatherings. The rented house, which had once represented a new beginning, was becoming a place of isolation and conflict. The stage was set for a breaking point. The silence, the arguments, and the unresolved anger made it increasingly unlikely that the situation would improve without outside intervention. Unfortunately, no such intervention arrived in time, and the tension that had been building over weeks was moving closer to a violent outcome. By the last week of March 2019, the conflict inside Claire and Michael's home had reached its breaking point. For weeks, the couple had lived in constant tension. Conversations had turned into arguments, and arguments had turned into long silences. The marriage, which had only begun a few weeks earlier, no longer carried the signs of hope and stability it once had. Instead, the home was marked by resentment, mistrust, and growing anger. On the evening of March 28th, the situation escalated in a way that neither family could have imagined. Michael returned home after work later than usual. He had stopped at a local pub where he drank with a colleague. According to later accounts, Michael seemed unsettled even before arriving home, carrying the frustration that had been building for weeks. Claire was already at the house, preparing dinner. When Michael entered, the atmosphere was tense immediately. He barely greeted her and sat in the living room. Claire tried to keep the evening calm, speaking in a measured voice and asking about his day. Michael responded with short answers, his mood visibly dark. The argument began shortly after. Michael brought up the same subject that had haunted their marriage since the night of discovery: her past and why she had hidden it. His tone was sharp and his words carried clear anger. Claire attempted once again to explain, repeating what she had said before, that she had always loved him, that she had feared losing him if she revealed the truth too soon, and that she was still the same person he had chosen to marry. But this time, Michael's reaction was more volatile. He accused her of deceiving him deliberately, saying that she had destroyed his trust and his sense of dignity. He raised his voice, pacing the room while Claire tried to calm him down. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting coming from the house, something unusual for the couple who had previously seemed quiet. The argument grew more heated. Claire's attempts at reassurance only fueled Michael's anger. At one point, he slammed his hand against the table, demanding why she had not told him earlier. Claire, in tears, replied that she had always planned to share her history but had been afraid. The exchange became circular. Her explanations met with his accusations, each response increasing the intensity. The turning point came when Michael's anger crossed into physical aggression. Witness accounts and evidence later revealed that he struck Claire during the argument. What began as shouting became violence. The situation escalated quickly, with Michael losing control and Claire unable to defend herself effectively. The struggle lasted several minutes. By the time it ended, Claire was seriously injured. Michael, realizing the severity of what had just happened, stood in shock. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. For a moment, he seemed frozen, unable to process the reality of the situation. Instead of calling for help immediately, Michael hesitated. Minutes passed before he contacted emergency services. When paramedics arrived, they found Claire unconscious and critically injured. Despite their efforts, she did not survive. The house that had once symbolized a new beginning for the couple was now a crime scene. Police arrived shortly after the paramedics and quickly detained Michael. He did not resist arrest but appeared dazed, repeating statements about betrayal and dishonesty. Officers noted that he smelled of alcohol, though he was coherent enough to answer basic questions. News of the incident spread quickly among neighbors. Some had heard the shouting earlier but had not expected such a tragic outcome. Others gathered outside the house, shocked by the presence of police cars and ambulances in what had always seemed like an ordinary street. For Claire's family, the news was devastating. Her sister, who had spoken with her just days earlier, could not believe that the situation had escalated to such an irreversible point. For Michael's family, the arrest was equally shocking. His mother later told investigators that she knew he had been troubled in recent weeks but never imagined he would become violent. By midnight, Michael was in custody, and the house was sealed for investigation. Officers collected evidence, photographed the scene, and interviewed neighbors. The tragic event marked the end of a short marriage and the beginning of a criminal case that would draw public attention. The climax of the story was not only the violence itself but also the irreversible consequences it carried. What began with a secret, discovered by chance, had led to a chain of arguments, rising tension, and finally a fatal confrontation. The conflict that had remained hidden inside the walls of their home was now exposed to the wider world, leaving both families and the community searching for answers. Following the tragic night of March 28, 2019, the case moved swiftly from the crime scene to the legal system. Michael Harris was arrested at the house and taken into police custody. He was formally charged the following day with murder, based on the evidence collected at the scene and the statements he made during questioning. During the initial police interviews, Michael admitted to striking Claire during the argument but claimed that he had not intended for her to die. He repeated that he felt deceived and betrayed, describing how he discovered her transgender history and how it consumed his thoughts in the weeks after their wedding. The officers recorded his words carefully, noting that while he expressed regret, he also attempted to justify his actions by pointing to his feelings of anger and confusion. Claire's family was notified immediately. Her sister traveled to Manchester to assist with funeral arrangements and to provide statements to the police. In her testimony, she explained that Claire had been afraid of telling Michael the truth, but she had always planned to do so at some point. She also described the phone calls in which Claire expressed concern about the growing conflict in the marriage. These details helped establish a clear picture of the events leading up to the fatal night. The case gained attention in local newspapers. Headlines described the tragedy of a marriage that ended within weeks, focusing on both the violent act and the circumstances surrounding Claire's identity. While the coverage remained factual, the story generated discussions in the community about honesty in relationships, acceptance, and the consequences of hidden truths. Michael's first court appearance took place in early April 2019. He stood before the magistrate's court in Manchester, where the charge of murder was formally read. His defense lawyer requested that the charge be reduced to manslaughter, arguing that Michael had acted in the heat of the moment rather than with premeditation. The prosecution, however, maintained that the severity of the attack and the evidence of prior arguments demonstrated that the act could not be minimized. The case was then moved to the Crown Court, where a jury would eventually decide. During the hearings, prosecutors presented evidence from the crime scene, medical reports, and witness statements from neighbors who heard the shouting. They also highlighted the delay in Michael's call to emergency services, suggesting that his actions showed recklessness and disregard for Claire's life. The defense presented Michael as a man overwhelmed by emotions he could not control. His lawyer emphasized his lack of prior criminal history, his steady employment, and his reputation among friends as a hard-working individual. They argued that alcohol on the night of the incident had further impaired his judgment. Over several weeks, the court heard detailed testimonies. Medical experts explained the injuries Claire sustained and confirmed that they were the direct cause of her death. Neighbors described hearing shouting and noises consistent with a physical struggle. Claire's sister spoke about the tension she had witnessed in recent phone calls and the fear Claire expressed about her husband's growing anger. Michael himself took the stand. He admitted to hitting Claire but said he had not planned to harm her. He repeated that he felt betrayed and claimed that the revelation about her past had shaken his sense of trust. The prosecution cross-examined him, asking whether betrayal could ever justify violence. He admitted that it could not, though he insisted that his emotions had clouded his judgment. After deliberations, the jury reached a decision. Michael Harris was found guilty of murder. The judge, in delivering the sentence, acknowledged the complexity of the emotions involved but emphasized that no amount of personal anger or sense of betrayal could excuse the taking of a life. The court sentenced Michael to life imprisonment with a minimum term before parole eligibility. Claire's family expressed relief at the verdict, though their grief remained heavy. Her sister told reporters that Claire had been a kind and gentle person who deserved safety and respect. She also stated that the outcome of the trial sent a message that violence could never be justified by personal feelings of betrayal. The resolution of the case in court brought legal closure, but the consequences continued for everyone involved. Michael's family struggled to come to terms with his actions, while Claire's community mourned the loss of a young woman who had hoped for a stable life after years of personal struggle. In the end, the courtroom became the place where the story concluded in a formal sense. The judge's words made clear that the justice system recognized the seriousness of the crime, and the sentence ensured accountability. Yet for both families, the resolution was bittersweet. One lost a daughter and sister, the other saw a son and brother sentenced to decades in prison. The case stood as a reminder of how quickly unresolved conflict can turn into tragedy, and how the law responds when private matters cross into criminal acts. The conclusion of the trial in 2019 did not mark the end of the story for the people involved. Instead, it opened a period of reflection, grief, and consequences that would last far beyond the court's decision. For Claire's family, the impact was profound. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a relative whose life had been marked by resilience. Claire had faced challenges during her transition, and she had worked hard to build a stable life. Her death reminded them of how fragile safety can be, even within what is supposed to be the most intimate and protective relationship. Her sister, who had been her confidant during her marriage, continued to speak about Claire publicly, emphasizing the importance of honesty, acceptance, and non-violence in relationships. Friends and colleagues at the clothing store where Claire had worked also felt her absence deeply. She had been known as reliable and polite, someone who treated customers with patience and kindness. In the weeks after her death, flowers were placed outside the store in her memory. Co-workers described how they missed her quiet presence and how they struggled to understand why her life had ended in such a way. For Michael's family, the outcome was also devastating, though in a different way. They had to accept that their son and brother had been found guilty of a serious crime. Michael's imprisonment left them with questions they could not easily answer. His mother, in particular, expressed sorrow both for Claire's family and for her own, saying that two families had been destroyed by one tragic decision. In the community, the case sparked discussions about honesty in relationships and the responsibilities partners have toward each other. Some saw the tragedy as a warning about the dangers of withholding important truths, while others pointed out that no amount of secrecy or personal history could justify violence. The dominant reflection, reinforced by the judge's words, was that personal anger cannot excuse the act of taking a life. The legal system treated the case with seriousness, but the social consequences extended further. Advocacy groups in the United Kingdom that supported transgender individuals highlighted Claire's story as an example of the risks that transgender women sometimes face in intimate relationships. They used the case to encourage open conversations about identity, acceptance, and safety. Over time, the intensity of media coverage faded, but the memory of the event remained strong for those directly affected. Claire's family continued to honor her privately, while Michael served his sentence. For both families, birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays became reminders of what had been lost. The impact on the community was also lasting. Neighbors who had lived near the couple often recalled how ordinary the marriage had seemed at first. The contrast between their quiet life before and the tragedy that unfolded afterward left many unsettled. It reminded people that outward appearances can hide deeper struggles. In reflection, the case underscored several important lessons. First, it highlighted the importance of communication and honesty in relationships. Claire's fear of rejection was understandable given her life experiences, but the decision to withhold the truth created a foundation of secrecy that later became the focus of conflict. Second, it demonstrated the destructive potential of anger left unmanaged. Michael's inability to control his emotions turned arguments into violence and left irreversible consequences. Finally, it reinforced the principle upheld by the court, that no personal grievance, however deep, can excuse the act of ending another person's life. The closing chapter of this case is not only about crime and punishment but also about reflection. It asks difficult questions about how individuals manage secrets, how society supports people who face discrimination, and how conflicts in relationships can be addressed before they escalate. For Claire, her life ended tragically, but her story continues to serve as a reminder of the need for compassion, patience, and nonviolence. For Michael, the years ahead in prison represent the long consequences of a single night when anger overcame judgment. For their families, the tragedy remains an enduring loss that cannot be measured only in legal terms. The case of Claire Thompson and Michael Harris is remembered not just for its legal outcome but for its human impact. It stands as a story of two people whose lives became entangled in love, secrecy, and conflict, and whose marriage ended in tragedy. In the end, the reflection left behind is clear. Honesty, respect, and self-control are essential in relationships, and when they are absent, the consequences can be permanent.